My sister Talia and I have never been super close. We are about 10 years apart in age. I'm 43 and she's 33. Talia has always been flighty, unpredictable, and to be quite honest, a little spoiled. Talia is 5 months pregnant. The baby's father isn't in the picture. At least, that's what she told me when she moved in with me. Things have been going pretty well since she arrived. Talia's been really helpful around the house. She's always tidying up, and since she's staying rent-free, I don't even have to ask. She's great with my dog, taking him on walks or playing with him in the yard while I'm at work. We've actually been bonding over cooking. She's a better cook than I remembered, and we've been trying out new recipes every week. She's funny and keeps the mood light, especially when I'm stressed. Despite the pregnancy stress she's going through, she makes a real effort to stay positive and even helps me with errands when I'm swamped. She's been looking for a job but hasn't had any luck since she got fired from her last one. She said it was because she took too many days off due to morning sickness. A few days ago, I came home to find some woman banging on my door. I parked and walked up, asking her if I could help. She looked absolutely crazed, her face red and her fists clenched.
"I'm here to see your sister,"
she said, almost yelling.
"Does she really think my husband is going to leave me for her? That will never ever happen. She's not the first one he's cheated with, and I'm sure he won't be the last."
I was floored. She said she was John's wife, the same John who was Talia's boss, and she started telling me everything. She's a stay-at-home mom with 3 kids, and one of them is nonverbal with autism. She told me she just found out about the 4-year affair Talia had been having with her husband. John had promised her it was over, but it wasn't. He was fully involved in the pregnancy, going to doctor's appointments and everything. She even showed me pictures. Talia and John hand in hand, kissing in a parking lot, and she even had receipts from a recent trip to Hawaii. Talia had told me she was visiting a college friend during that trip. After the woman left, I confronted Talia and she confessed to everything. She's been sleeping with John, her married boss, for 4 years. She knew he was married, knew about his special needs child, and still did it anyway. When we got inside, I told her I needed time to process. She followed me around, demanding that I talk to her. I wanted to wait. I wanted to think about it. She wouldn't leave me be, and I couldn't hold back. I told her I didn't want her living with me anymore. She kept insisting that John was going to leave his wife, like that made it okay. He'd been telling her that since the beginning of their affair. Here's where I might be the asshole. I told Talia she had a week to get out because I couldn't live with someone I couldn't trust. A delusional homewrecker, in my exact words. I also told our parents what she did, and now they're incredibly disappointed in her. Our dad won't even look at her. She says it was a mistake, but a mistake happens once, not over and over for 4 years. So, am I the asshole for telling my pregnant sister to leave after finding out about her affair? Or did I go too far by getting our parents involved? I don't know if I overreacted or not. She doesn't have a job and now she has no one to lean on. She can't go to John because he has a wife. And now she can't go to our parents because I told them. This feels terrible. What would you do? A few days after telling Talia she had a week to get out, John showed up on my doorstep. I thought he was there to help her pack up her things, but instead, he wanted to talk. I had no idea what I was in for. We sat down at the kitchen table. Talia sat across from me, looking a little too relaxed for someone who had just blown up an entire family. John started by apologizing for the scene his wife had caused on my doorstep, but then he quickly shifted to pleading with me to let Talia stay.
"You can't kick her out,"
he said, leaning forward with this intensity in his eyes like he was about to reveal some grand love story.
"I know this whole situation looks bad, but it's more complicated than you think. Talia doesn't have anywhere else to go right now, and look, I've been trying to fix things for years."
As if that wasn't enough, he then reached across the table and gently took Talia's hand. He held it like they were some star-crossed lovers in a romance movie, not 2 people who had been sneaking around behind his wife's back for years. My stomach turned, but I didn't say anything, yet. John took a deep breath and launched into the story of how he and Talia met. Apparently, it all started at work. She worked for him, which made their relationship a secret from the very beginning. He described the early days like it was something out of a soap opera.
"We had to keep it hidden. I didn't want to fall in love with her, but I just couldn't help it. Every day I'd walk into the office and there she'd be and everything just felt right."
He went on about how hard it was to pretend like everything was normal when, in reality, he was falling for someone else. According to him, the hardest part was pretending he wasn't in love with Talia while still having pictures of his wife and kids on his desk.
Talia asked me to put them away.
He said, glancing over at her with a look that was almost apologetic.
But my workplace is really big on family life. They'd notice if the photos just disappeared and I didn't want to raise any suspicions.
He rubbed his thumb over the back of Talia's hand, looking at her with the kind of affection I could hardly believe he could feel after all this mess.
I love her.
He continued, his voice softening.
She's so different from anyone I've ever met. She understands me in a way no one else ever has. She makes me feel alive.
I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This man, who had been married for years and had a wife and 3 kids, one of whom has special needs, was sitting here in my kitchen, talking about how he had fallen in love with my sister. He listed off reasons he loved her like he was trying to convince me this was all justified. Talia was fun, exciting, compassionate, and didn't judge him for feeling trapped in his marriage. He loved the way she made him feel free, like he could breathe again after years of suffocating under the weight of family obligations. He went on and on about how hard this affair had been for him, how he didn't want to be the bad guy, but he also didn't want to lose Talia.
I've been putting processes in place for years.
He said, as if leaving his wife was some business deal he had to close before he could move on. He told me the only reason he hadn't left yet was because of the health insurance his job provided for her and their kids. Apparently, she has a medical condition that means she needs expensive therapy that his insurance pays for, and she could never pay for it on her own. He would be able to keep the kids on his insurance, but if they divorced, his wife would be left with no coverage, so they had to stay married just for that.
She needs the insurance, so a divorce has been out of the question.
He explained, his voice almost pleading now.
That's the only reason I haven't left. But I swear we sleep in separate bedrooms. There's no romance, no affection. It's just a matter of time before I can finally separate from her legally.
As John spoke, I glanced over at Talia. She sat there smirking, like this entire conversation was going exactly as she'd planned. Like I was supposed to feel sorry for them. Like I should understand and sympathize with their love story. He finally finished with,
I'm going to make things right. I promise you that. I'll take care of everything. You won't have to worry about my wife showing up here again.
I didn't know what to say. I was still in shock that John had turned this entire disaster into some kind of romantic epic. It was like they both expected me to nod along and say, "Oh, okay, that makes sense. It's all fine now because you're in love." But it's not fine. Nothing about this is fine. And now I'm sitting here wondering if I made a mistake by letting Talia stay. Should I have thrown her out like I initially planned? She has nowhere else to go, but after hearing all of this, I'm starting to think I've been way too lenient. Yes, John is just as guilty, if not more, but Talia knew exactly what she was doing. She knew he was married with kids and she didn't care. And now she's sitting here, pregnant, in my house, smirking like everything's going to work out just fine for her. Did I make a mistake by letting her stay? Should I have kicked her out the moment I found out? 3 months have passed since the day John first showed up at my door, pleading for me to let Talia stay. She's still living with me, and John has become a regular presence. He picks her up for dates once a week, always polite and respectful, like the perfect boyfriend. They even went away for 2 weekends together. Both times, John assured me his wife knew about the trips and that she was fine with it.
She understands the situation.
He said,
It's not a love marriage, it's just something we have to do for the kids.
Talia still hasn't found a job, and I'm beginning to wonder if she's even looking anymore. John gives her money now and then to get her hair and nails done, and she's receiving state assistance for the baby's care. She doesn't seem worried about the future, content with the arrangement, and completely convinced that John is going to leave his wife soon. But I've had this growing feeling in my gut that something isn't right. Then one day, everything changed. I was at work when I got a notification that I had a visitor. Confused, I made my way to the lobby, and there, standing by the door, was John's wife, Maggie. My stomach dropped the moment I saw her. Her face was calm, but her eyes were tired, and I immediately knew this wasn't going to be a friendly chat. And then I saw it. her stomach. She was pregnant. Not far along, maybe 3 or 4 months, but it was unmistakable. "Hi," she said softly.
I just want to talk.
I couldn't keep the shock out of my voice as I pointed to her stomach. "Whose baby is that?" Maggie's eyes flashed with something, maybe pity, before she answered.
It's John's. Whose else could it be?
I felt like the floor was falling out from under me. Maggie must have seen the confusion on my face because she stepped closer, lowering her voice.
I know you thought he and I were just together for convenience. That's what he's been telling you, right? But we're still very much together. We're still married and we're still, well, involved.
Maggie went on to explain how things had been since she'd knocked on my door months ago. John had come home after that day, full of apologies, saying that the affair with Talia was over, that he was committed to their marriage. He promised her he wouldn't see Talia anymore and that he was done with the lies.
He's been more attentive lately,
She said, her voice tightening.
He's been helping with the kids more, being a better husband. Except for a couple of weekends when he said he had work trips.
I felt a knot form in my stomach. I already knew what was coming.
I found out those work trips weren't work trips at all.
Maggie continued, her tone hardening.
They were with Talia.
My heart raced, anger and disbelief swirling inside me. Maggie kept talking, her voice steady but laced with pain. She explained how she had suspected something was still going on, how she had confronted John, and how he had spun more lies to keep her from finding out the truth. But now, with the baby on the way, Maggie needed things to be clear. She needed Talia to be out of John's life, for good.
John's a good father,
She said, almost bitterly.
When he's not cheating, he's a good husband too. But I can't compete with this fantasy he's built with your sister. I need her to go away. And I was hoping you could help me with that.
I stared at her, stunned. He told Talia it was a marriage of convenience, that you weren't together. Maggie glanced down at her pregnant belly, her lips curling into a sad smile.
You can clearly see that's not true. For a moment, we just stood there in silence.
Then Maggie took a deep breath and asked,
Can we come up with a plan? Talia needs to know the truth, and I think it's time for her to see John for who he really is.
I hesitated. My mind was racing. Talia was my sister and she was pregnant too, but this whole situation had spiraled out of control, and it wasn't just about her anymore. Maggie's kids, her family, they were all caught in the middle of this, and John was stringing them along just like he was stringing Talia along. Maggie and I sat down and talked for a long time. She told me about her marriage to John, how it had started strong but slowly eroded as he became more distant, more secretive. She admitted that she had known something was wrong for a long time, but had tried to make it work for the sake of their kids. And now, with another baby on the way, she wasn't going to let John destroy their family any further.
I don't blame Talia for falling for his lies.
Maggie said, her voice soft.
But I need her to see the truth. It's going to hurt, but it has to happen. And I can't do it alone.
By the time Maggie left, we had a plan. It was going to be painful for Talia, and I wasn't looking forward to it, but I knew it was the only way. Maggie needed to end this affair for good, and I was going to help her do it. John had been lying to both of them, and it was time for the truth to come out, no matter how much it hurt. As Maggie walked away, I couldn't help but feel like I was betraying my sister. But at the same time, I knew this was the only way to make things right. Talia deserved better than to live in John's shadow, believing his lies, and Maggie deserved a husband who wasn't stringing her along. This was the beginning of the end, and there was no turning back. Talia had been pacing all day, her hand occasionally resting on her swollen stomach. I noticed the discomfort etched across her face, the tightening in her belly, the way she winced with every step. She complained of back pain, but it was more than that. It was tension, a gnawing unease that was only growing as the hours ticked by. It was Saturday, the day I had been dreading, and the day I had planned to show Talia the truth. My heart had been lodged in my throat since the morning, and every text that popped up on my phone made me feel like I was sinking deeper into something I couldn't turn back from. I watched as Talia checked her phone repeatedly, her brow furrowed in worry. "What's wrong?" I asked, even though I already knew.
John's not answering.
She replied, a hint of panic creeping into her voice. I swallowed hard, knowing what was coming. "Why don't we go to the park and take a walk?" I suggested. I had arranged for the truth to unfold there. Talia and I had been going to the park regularly. It was good for the baby, good for her. I thought it would be the perfect setting for her to see what she needed to see, even though it would break her heart. We got in the car and drove to the park near our house, the one with the shelter and the shaded playground equipment. I pulled into the parking lot and spotted them immediately: John, Maggie, and their kids. My heart clenched as I braced myself for what was about to happen. Talia hadn't noticed them yet, but I had. I had known they would be there. When I stopped the car, Talia's eyes lit up.
"You didn't tell me he'd be here."
She said, a grin spreading across her face. But then she looked closer. John was sitting on a blanket with Maggie and their youngest child. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't sneaking around. He was there, with his family. We both watched as John leaned down and kissed Maggie sweetly. The kind of kiss that spoke volumes. The kind I'd seen him give Talia a dozen times. But now it was reserved for his wife. Then he helped Maggie to her feet, his hand resting gently on her baby bump. Talia's smile faltered. A tear slipped down her cheek as she took in the sight of Maggie's growing belly.
"Did you know about this?"
She asked quietly, her voice shaky. "Yes," I admitted, my heart aching for her. "Everyone knows but you."
"She's pregnant."
Talia whispered, her eyes still locked on the scene unfolding before her. "And he loves her," I said softly. "And their family." Talia blinked rapidly, her lips trembling.
"Love isn't finite,"
she said almost desperately.
"It expands. Someone can love more than one person."
"He told you it was a marriage of convenience," I reminded her, my voice firmer now, though it hurt me to say it. She shrugged, but her eyes stayed fixed on John, who was now pushing Maggie gently on the swing. They were laughing, completely at ease. The kind of easy, genuine happiness I had never seen between John and Talia. The kind of happiness that told me everything I needed to know about where John's heart truly lay. "He has a happy family," I said gently. "It's not for convenience." Talia's expression hardened. She reached for her seatbelt, snapping it back on.
"Can we go home now?"
she asked, her voice flat, empty. John must have sensed something because he looked in our direction. For a brief second, his eyes locked on Talia, but then he shook his head, silently telling her not to disturb him, and he turned away, as if he hadn't seen her at all, as if she didn't exist. Talia lifted her hand to wave at him, but he ignored it, too absorbed in his picture-perfect family moment to acknowledge her presence. "You still want to go home?" I asked gently.
"Yes,"
she whispered, her voice breaking, but her resolve holding strong. We drove back in silence. Talia spent the rest of the day locked in her room, refusing to come out. I heard her crying through the door but didn't push her. I knew this was something she had to process on her own. The truth had shattered her, just as I had feared it would. At 3 a.m., she woke me.
"My water broke."
She said, standing at my bedroom door, her face pale, her voice shaky.
"Can you call John?"
I did. I called him again and again, left voicemails, sent texts. But he didn't answer, not once. I drove her to the hospital. She cried the whole way, clutching her belly, whispering John's name over and over again like a prayer. But he never came. He never called back. Talia labored alone. She delivered alone. I stood by her side, but it wasn't enough. She wanted John. She needed him. But he wasn't there. The baby was born at 5 the next afternoon. A beautiful, healthy baby girl. Talia held her, her eyes filled with tears, but not joy, only heartbreak. She kept looking at the door, hoping John would walk in, hoping he would show up, but he didn't. He never cared. And now, as I stood in the sterile, silent room, watching my sister cradle her newborn, I wondered if she would ever be able to pick up the pieces of her shattered heart, or if John had destroyed her completely. Talia had been home from the hospital with Amanda for 3 weeks, and despite every call and text, John still hadn't come by. It crushed her. She would let Amanda cry for hours as she stared at her phone, her face expressionless. I had been the one to get up in the night, to give Amanda bottles of formula, to hold her and comfort her while my sister remained locked in her grief. She didn't want to touch her own daughter. She didn't want to do anything. I'd taken 3 weeks off work to help. It wasn't just the baby who needed care. Talia was a shell of herself. She wasn't just mourning the end of her relationship with John, but the future she had built in her head, the family she thought they'd be. A few days ago, she'd even gone to John's office, only to be turned away by security. They'd been warned she might show up. The day I had to return to work, I got up early and gave Amanda her bottle. I held her close, feeling the weight of the responsibility I was about to leave behind. I'd arranged for Mrs. Aldridge, the elderly neighbor, to come over and watch Amanda. Talia had been spending most of her time in bed, and I didn't trust her to take care of the baby alone. The day before, she had disappeared into her room after a mysterious phone call, coming out in a strangely better mood. But she still wouldn't hold Amanda. She hadn't even tried to bond with her daughter. When I left for work that morning, my stomach was tight with anxiety. I called Mrs. Aldridge during lunch just to check in. She told me Amanda was fine, but that Talia had packed a bag and left. A car had come to pick her up, and now she was gone. She'd left her baby behind. Panic surged through me as I rushed out of the office and drove to John's work. My hands shook as I marched into his building, demanding to see him. I didn't care who I had to talk to. I needed answers. "You called her yesterday, didn't you?" I asked the moment I was ushered into his office, my voice trembling with rage and fear. John set his reading glasses aside and sighed heavily, like this conversation was an inconvenience to him.
We have a child together. Of course I called her.
"What took you so long? It's been 3 weeks and she's been falling apart." His face remained neutral, like he had been expecting this.
My situation is delicate. You know that.
My throat tightened. "Where is Talia?"
Talia went somewhere she can get some help.
He said, his voice oddly calm, like he had rehearsed this explanation. "What kind of help?" I whispered, dread creeping into my chest. John didn't flinch.
Her mental health needs are being addressed. I'm handling everything.
The room seemed to spin. "Mental health? What are you talking about?" John's tone hardened.
Apparently Talia called my wife yesterday and threatened to harm herself. My wife called the police. I told Talia I would meet her at the hospital if she'd go there. They placed Talia on a psychiatric hold.
My stomach dropped. "She's on a hold?" I could barely get the words out. John nodded, his expression unchanging.
They're going to keep her as an inpatient for the next 90 days. After that, I don't know what will happen.
"And then?" I choked out. He shrugged.
And then hopefully she'll be better.
I stared at him, my heart pounding in my chest. "What about the baby?" I asked, my voice cracking. "You haven't even come to see her. What am I supposed to do with Amanda?" His face darkened, and for the first time, his mask slipped.
Talia sent my wife some pictures. I've seen her.
"That's it?" I could barely contain my anger. "You've only seen pictures? She's your daughter." He glanced away, uncomfortable now.
My wife made it clear. That baby, Amanda, isn't welcome under our roof under any circumstances.
"That baby?" I repeated, stunned by his detachment. John looked flustered.
Amanda, I do know her name. I'm sorry, but my hands are tied.
I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This man, the father of my niece, was washing his hands of the situation, leaving his daughter without a second thought. It made me sick. I left his office, numb with disbelief, and drove back home. Mrs. Aldridge handed Amanda to me with a sad smile, and I held her tightly, feeling her tiny body relax against mine. She cooed softly, her little hands gripping my shirt. She was so small, so innocent in all of this. I cuddled her close, trying to make sense of everything. John didn't care. Talia was gone, lost in her own pain. And here I was, holding this fragile little life, knowing she had been abandoned by the two people who were supposed to love her most. But Amanda wasn't alone. I wasn't going to let her be the victim in all of this. I couldn't let that happen. Gaining formal custody of Amanda was a bittersweet victory. The court proceedings had been straightforward, with Talia not contesting. She didn't want to be a mother. She had made that clear. After her 90-day psychiatric hold ended, she moved into an apartment John had arranged for her. She came to see me once, sat on my couch, and told me the truth I already knew. Motherhood wasn't for her.
"I don't have the time,"
she had said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear.
"I want you to take her. You already love her, I can tell. I don't think I was made for motherhood. I learned a lot about myself in therapy. And this is one thing I do know now."
She said it all so calmly, like she was talking about a business decision, not her own daughter. "So you want me to keep Amanda?" I asked, though I already knew the answer.
"If you want her,"
she replied, shrugging. She never told me that she and John were still seeing each other, but I knew. She had that calm look in her like before the baby, before John shunned her. She was happy again, and her happiness didn't involve her baby. I had fallen in love with Amanda from the moment I held her. Despite the sleepless nights, the endless feedings, and the tears, she had become the light of my life. So of course I said yes, but I had one condition. If I take her, I said, my voice firm, you have to stay out of our lives, permanently. Talia didn't hesitate.
Okay.
She said without blinking. And just like that, she walked out of my house for the last time, leaving Amanda behind for good. Amanda is thriving now. She's a happy, bubbly baby with bright eyes and an infectious laugh. Becoming her mother has been the hardest thing I've ever done, but it's also the most rewarding. Every time she reaches for me, every time she calls me mama, I feel a rush of love that makes all the heartache worth it. I may not have planned this, but it's exactly where I was meant to be. The last I heard, Talia was living in a nearby city. She's working as a receptionist and sees John when he can fit her into his schedule. My parents told me she's content, sitting around and waiting for him to call, accepting the scraps of time he gives her. She's happy with her life, or so they say. I don't hear from her anymore, and I prefer it that way. One day, I ran into Maggie at the grocery store. She spotted me first, looking into the car seat perched on my cart. Amanda was fast asleep, her tiny face so peaceful. Maggie's eyes lingered on her, and for a moment, I saw something shift in her expression.
God, she looks just like our youngest.
She said, her voice soft, almost wistful. Before I could stop myself, I blurted out, "Is this enough for you? Is the life you have with John worth it, knowing he's not fully yours?" She blinked, taken aback by the question, but then her face softened into something sadder.
It's enough for now,
she said quietly. And then, just like that, she hurried past me. I stood there for a moment, watching her go when John rounded the corner with his own cart. He saw me, froze for a second, then glanced at Amanda. Just a quick, passing look, and kept walking. He didn't say a word, didn't stop, didn't acknowledge the baby that was half his. It was like we were invisible to him. But it was okay. Amanda deserves more than a fleeting glance from a father who never wanted her, and she needed more than a mother who couldn't be bothered. She deserves a family that loves her fully and unconditionally. And I'm going to give her that, no matter what. Because in the end, love is what makes a family. And she'll never have to wonder if she's enough.
Thanks so much for listening to today's story. If you enjoyed it, be sure to give this video a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss out on our daily stories. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this Am I the Asshole? So what do you think about this situation? Drop a comment below. Do you think they were in the right or wrong? Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one.